So, welcome back to 3rd Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and I actually did notice that I had missed something in my backlog, so I will be able to do this before I fully run out, so I'm going to record this immediately after the previous siege of Umbar. And this is a free-for-all. A free-for-all in this, I can't remember the exact name of this map actually, but it's one of those northern wilderness maps within Rhudaur. And it is a free-for-all, a very chaotic free-for-all as well. It's not as if there's sort of unified teams of any sort. We're just going to be seeing a lot of players who are very familiar faces battle it out for supremacy here. I'm not sure whether I can call this a siege free-for-all in the same way that Rhudaur Outpost was, because while there is a settlement in the middle and that is kind of similar, it's not as fortified as that one, and nor do I think will any of the players bust a gut to try and occupy it fully in the same way that we saw in that replay over in Silmarillion. Nonetheless, we will go through the army compositions now, starting off with the player who sent me the battle replay, which, once again, is Engsfitz, and he's going to be playing as Lindon, which we've seen him play a couple of times recently, and I'm glad of that. Lindon are definitely the hardest of the Elven factions to play, I think. They're in melee, actually. Once things get into melee, they're arguably the most difficult to deal with, because melee defense is harder to circumvent than armor, and they have the highest melee defense, and they also have the highest amount of pikes that they can mass up on the front line, which obviously makes a big difference to how long they can hold for. The issue, of course, is before they get into melee, they're by far the most vulnerable because of their low armor, which means that, you know, obviously before the melee fight ever begins, really, you can find yourself on the back foot. We shall see how things progress here, though, because it's not quite as simple as a line battle where the opponent can just sort of line up skirmishes and try and shoot you down. You can be a little bit more tricksy than that. And we have some Mithlond Lancers here. The javelins can be used to deal with either other cavalry or armoured units on foot, and then they turn into lance cavalry afterwards. So if enemy cavalry does catch up to them in melee, they're in a little bit of trouble because they don't have any bonuses there. But that's what the javelins are for, really, in my opinion. And then you can use them as an anti-infantry unit once their javelins have been expended. Lindon's cavalry, much like the rest of their army, is very damaging, but obviously the low armour overall does present a bit of a problem. The Harlindon Riders, for example, here we've seen Elven Horse Archers recently, actually, in the other battle that Engsfitz gave me in the Plains of Gorgoroth, be used to really good effect, actually. But again, high damage, but very much glass cannons. You do need to be quite careful with them. They're actually a little bit of an outlier, because they are actually a little bit tankier, I think, than the Mirkwood Horse Archers because of their shields, but again, it's very similar levels of survivability, to be honest. But they also are spear cavalry in melee, so unlike the Mithlond Lancers, if they do get engaged by enemy cavalry, it's kind of the other way around. You harass infantry at range, and you get into cavalry once you're out of ammunition. Speaking of which, we've got more Harlindon Riders that I did see. Yeah, here they are, I think. The mighty Horse Lords of Ulmo, arguably the most damaging unit of Lance Knights in the game, but obviously the lack of a shield and their low armour values means that once their hit points are expended, they do fall quicker than other knights, but they are also very fast. I think in terms of damage potential, they actually have the highest ceiling of any unit of Lance Knights in the game, because getting into melee with them because of Lindon's super high melee defense is also a pretty questionable idea outside of only the best units of melee cavalry, and of course they tend to be much slower than the Horse Lords of Ulmo, so I think if used correctly they could actually be the most devastating unit of knights in the game, but of course that can be said for a lot of Lindon's roster, to be honest with you. It's just they're quite fragile in comparison anyway. For Lindon pikemen, pikes are obviously the sort of thing that Lindon can do very well. They can mass them up very easily. Isengard, a big fan of them because they get around Lindon's main problem, which is low armour. Obviously they really pack on the armour quite a lot. There's a case for saying they're the best unit of sort of non-bodyguard line infantry in the game, as I keep saying. I would still give that to the Imladris Guardians because you can have more of them, and I just think overall they have the slight edge, but I think as a singular unit, the Isengard really do offer Lindon something very important, which is that little bit of solidity in the centre. Mithlond Marines and Lindon Marines. Obviously the Mithlond Marines are good swordsmen in melee, Lindon Marines are good spearmen in melee, so different focuses, but ultimately, of course, very nice javelins. The Mithlond Marines as well are more similar to something like the Seafarers now, where their javelins are actually very damaging, but they have lower amounts of them, so that is worth bearing in mind. Harlindon Infantry, really nice unit of Elven line infantry. Not as expensive as the Isengard, of course, but they don't have the same armour or stats in general, really, but still, very good unit to mass up. If you get into melee, there are very few factions that would like to face the Harlindon Infantry en masse in a pure sword-to-sword fight. More Lindon Marines, we have more pikes on the front line as well with the Harlindon Infantry. Harland infantry and 4 Lindon pikes, and that's pretty much it, aside from the Harland Guard, which of course as an archer, better archers than the 4 Lindon ones all around, but also they have a shield. They're also spears in melee. Lindon are very good at these hybrid units, where the units sort of fill multiple roles, as it were. Cavalry won't really want to charge into the Harland Guard unless they catch them off balance because of those spears, but also they are shielded, so they're a little bit better when it comes to skirmishing than the alternatives for Lindon. Then we have Eclipse, who's fighting with him, who is playing as Isengard, so clearly, of course, this in a free-for-all like this, to be fair, it's quite difficult to get a lore-friendly battle anyway, but that isn't certainly going to be the case here. Dunlending clansmen, who probably are in fairly familiar terrain, to be honest with you. I imagine this is the sort of area where the Dunlanders would want to live. A nice unit of militia spears with a better anti-cav bonus. Uruk-hai infantry, obviously really nice, heavily armoured line infantry, which, to be fair, the Uruk-hai in general with their armour should be able to offset the lower armour values of Lindon quite nicely. And both of these factions, of course, have got very nice pikemen, so if it comes down to it in the late game and they still have their pikes remaining, I wouldn't bet against this team by any means. Uruk-hai Reavers as well for a bit of armour piercing, which, to be fair, Lindon don't have a huge amount of outside of their javelin, so it's nice to see that. Guards of Orthanc, more Reavers at the back here. We've got more pikes up here. It's probably going to be a lot of hidden units in general. Uruk-hai crossbows there, Dunlanders, Uruk-hai infantry, more Reavers and pikes. So yeah, fairly standard fare. Lots of standard Uruk-hai surrounded by some lower end Reavers and some Dunlanders just to pad things out. But yeah, there's going to be a lot of hidden units on a map like this because of how heavily forested it is. The Southern Alliance, we have Rob Goblin, who's going to be playing as Mirkwood, who I actually haven't seen this player before, but Mirkwood, ever the fan favourites. Hiriak are over here, obviously nice spears, really nice shield value as well, which Mirkwood's armour values are not brilliant compared to a lot of other factions either, but I do think Mirk would get around it by having a lot of units that can hide, and also their heavy units do have these shields, which are really, really nice, and do make up for quite a lot of Lindon's discrepancies, actually, when you compare the two. Elders of the Elven King, those Silverthorn arrows, that's something Lindon don't have as well. They don't have like a really high-end archer, like the Elders, the God Helene, the Watchers of the Golden Wood, that sort of thing. Lindon don't really have an equivalent to that, which of course a lot of people do like to wall up behind their archers. And in fact, you can tell that this is going to be quite a heavily forested map, because that's all we can see from the Mirkwood army. They have some stakes positioned there, but they could find themselves getting run over by Isengard very quickly if they're not careful, because their ally is pretty far away from them. We have Mevin over here playing as Mordor, so once again we have an elf and an orc army marching in tandem. Some orc archers, so clearly Mordor, generally speaking, they're not really going to beat an enemy faction when it comes to archer quality, but they can use them as a supporting tool, as a means of wasting the opponent's ammunition, and then they can overwhelm them in melee later, unhindered really by enemy skirmish fire. Orc fodder and Moran on guard, so some lower end spears just to pad things out of varying quality. Uruk captains in the middle there, so a bit of armour piercing. We have temple executioners, we have some upgraded temple inquisitors and Melkor's chosen, so that's a serious melee cavalry lineup. This is what I was talking about, like this is the sort of thing the Horse Lords of Ormo will not want to get tangled up in, because that's the sort of fight that they wouldn't like to be tangled up in. Temple Executioners, a lot of Minas Morgul chosen and Blackguard of Barad-dûr, Nazgul and Temple Guard. So once again, we're seeing a player go for the quality focus for Mordor. Lots of the higher end units and cavalry, and not a huge amount of the lower end. There is lower end units in here, but they're not here in huge quantities. Which again, that's not the way I like to play Mordor, to be honest with you. I much prefer going for the numbers focused approach with them. I think they actually do better in that regard, where you intersperse smaller amounts of quality throughout a horde rather than going for the high quality here, because even if you do this as Mordor, while there is a lot of quality to be had, if you find yourself staring down the barrel of another quality focused faction who can do it entirely, like Khazad-dûm or Imladris, you'll lose the fight. So that is worth bearing in mind if you're Mordor. Going in for all their quality units won't necessarily mean you out-quality the enemy. Speaking of which, they're going up against Rhudaur, so to be fair, that isn't going to be too much of a concern, but you've got the Coldfell Maidens here. The Javelins are going to be very useful against Mordor's cavalry if they're microed correctly with Baldric the God, I should say. We've got Rhudaur Swordsmen, who are here just for their numbers, of course. Granadine Nobles, very nice unit of knights with that armour-piercing attack in melee. Definitely sets them apart from the other Lance Knights, even if they're a little bit more fragile in the same way that the Horse Lords of Ulmo are. Rhudaur Marksmen here, Granadine Berserkers, Granadine Pikes and Enslavers, Essenmoor's Troll Hunters. This is the problem, like, all of Mordor's quality going up against all of these Rhudaur hand-thrown projectiles, javelins and axe throwers. Could leave them being very wounded before the battle really begins for them. Another Northman faction is who they're going to be marching alongside with Andrade, Andrade, who is going to be playing as Dale. Lots of Dalian bowmen and Bardian marchers on the front, as you would often expect for Dale. They've gone for a lot of heavy archers. You really don't want to be getting mixed up in a skirmish fight with Dale, because 9 times out of 10 they will have brought sufficient amounts of archers to win that fight for them. And if you face them by going aggressive against them, they can wilt a little bit. Blackshot Dragon Slayers up here in the tree line. Got some Dalian cavalry and some Earls just to offer some mobility. I like that. Even though Dale's cavalry is not as great as other factions' cavalry tends to be, it always pays to have mobility in a free-for-all like this. Barding Herd here in numbers as well, some Dalian spearmen. Dismounted Earls of Dale with some sword masters of Esgaroth, without the armour upgrade on this occasion, but still nice to have some heavy swordsmen, spears, and more sword masters. Is there Dalian paladins? I don't think there is. Nope, doesn't look like it is. So the final team today, who have gone a little bit more defensive with it, we see Dol Amroth yet again, played by FFA Muffins. He's got some Perithil riders up here, so some heavier horse archers. We saw them used very nicely in Angsvitz's last game as well, when they were under the command of Tundra's Fox. Let's see if Muffins can utilise them just as well. Got some civilians on the front line with some dismounted Knights of the Silver Swan in and amongst them as well. As nice as the morale buffs the dismounted Knights of the Silver Swan provide, they're not going to suddenly turn civilians into the killing machines that maybe Muffins is hoping for here. Got some Haven Knights as well, so a really nice unit of melee cavalry, again the sort of thing the Horse Swords of Ormo need to avoid. Ethalond Halberdiers, I should say. Nice armour-piercing phalanx, and a nice pike phalanx as well, with the upgraded Doranano pike, so he's going more for the keeping the opponent at arm's length strategy here. We can't see anything else of his army, but I would assume that he's got some hidden units up in these trees as well, because that is nowhere near a big enough army to have eaten up all his funds. And finally, Sin of the Dark Cloud playing as Numenor, as he is wont to do. Numenorian cohort are in here. We've got some Numenorian Spear Guard as well, so obviously when it comes to quality, armoured quality as well, Numenor are not going to be found wanting. Steel Bowmen, lots of Seafarers. We also have the combination of Royal Legion of Armelos and Pharazim Swordmasters, and the Naru Royal Guard and Sentinels back here. So I mean, this is potentially most of his army. I think there's probably maybe a couple of hidden units, but there's a lot of quality in there. A small army that is also on foot. So we shall see how this goes. But without further ado, let's begin. And I would imagine the first order of business is going to be over here, because Rob Goblin's Woodland Realm Patrol is going to immediately start opening up on the Isengard lines. And I mean, if I were Eclipse in this situation, this would be too mouth-watering a target to pass up. I would be extremely tempted to just go all in with my army, because Mirkwood, they may occupy a hill over here, but their ally is a little bit far away. They've got some of their units just in front of them. Mordor are shifting over here as well. But the opportunity here to potentially lay these Woodland Realm Patrol low, and you can see immediately the crossbow bolts are coming in. And while armour piercing is the order of the day for crossbowmen, the stopping power they have means they're going to absolutely tear through Woodland Realm Patrol like this. This is the kind of unit that you don't want to park right in front of the enemy to be shot, because Mirkwood's strength at skirmishing outside of the Hiri Peng comes from the fact that they can hide and they can bide their time and wait for the opportune moment to open up. And that's not what Rob Goblin has done here. He is downhill of Isengard and is trying to shoot into them. I'm sure he is doing some damage. However, the cold hard facts here are that Isengard can mitigate this damage much better because they actually pack on that armour. It's really one of the main features of their faction in general. Mirkwood do not. It's not the way Mirkwood generally do business. If you're going to go all out aggression with Mirkwood and go right up into the face of the enemy, it's not going to be with archers, it's going to be with high damage infantry. And then you use your archers in a supporting sense. You can see the Huntsmen of Amon Lanka moving, as are the Sindar of the Girdle, so Mirkwood are going to move forward here. They're going to go after the Harlanden Guard, and to be fair, I mean, this isn't the worst charge they could take. I mean, they are spears in melee, so if I were Angsvitz, I would face them toward the enemy. Trying to run them away is not going to yield you anything here, because they're going to catch up to you, and facing your backs to them is going to result in some damage being dealt. But the Dunlending clansmen are on the way forward, as are the Pikes. So Rob Goblin is going to have to leave without making up too much ground, and of course the archers in behind now will be able to do damage, especially to the Huntsmen, who don't have the advantage of the multiple HP that the Sindar the Girdle have. Meanwhile, over here, you can see Dol Amroth moving forward with their Doranernal archers, getting charged immediately actually by the Earls of Dale, which is nice and aggressive. Dalian cavalry moving in as well. So I mean, certainly this is going to put to bed any hopes Dol Amroth will have had for skirmishing with Dale. There is no way they'll do that now with the losses they've already taken. But of course it will also, in large quantities, deal with the Dalian cavalry. There was some javelins coming in then, wasn't there? No, that's Blackshot Dragon Slayers, and yeah, I mean, good shots actually from the Blackshot Dragon Slayers. Worth focusing down the Haven Knights. Huge amounts of arrow fire coming forward from Dale, as you would imagine. And immediately Dol Amroth is going to have to leave tails betwixt their legs, really, because if they stay here for much longer, all the units they sent out here are going to get absolutely dusted, really. And with the support, actually, the Perenthal Horse Guard ended up losing to the Earls of Dale, which goes to show that having sufficient support around you means that a relatively even fight turned into a fairly significant victory for Dale. And now with the Coldfell Maidens moving forward, they need to get the Haven Knights out there. They're getting shot by the Black Shots fairly consistently. There's also a huge amount of standard arrow fire coming in, which, to be fair, I mean, when the ammunition supply runs dry, that could be a problem. But not a successful foray into enemy territory, that certainly, by Dol Amroth. And Numenor obviously coming in here as well. Some javelins being belched forth by the Coldfells, and they were going after, I think, the Haven Knights, and more damage is done. The Coldfells will also be able to defend themselves in melee reasonably against a unit that is this depleted. We shall see how this develops. Meanwhile, Huntsmen of Amon Lank continuing to try and be aggressive here, but again, this is what I was thinking would have happened a little sooner perhaps, as the Dunlanders overwhelm now some Woodland Realm units. The Axemen are in here, but again, like, it's not a good engagement this for Mirkwood. Like, they don't do well in this sort of situation when they're bottled up, when the situation is turned against them. We actually see some champions of the White Hand which have revealed themselves from cover, which did a huge amount of damage off the charge to their former masters in Mordor. But at least Mordor are here now. I mean, that is something that Mirkwood can be grateful for. Hiri Peng are going to be able to open up from the high ground as well. Temple Inquisitors and Melkor's Chosen will mean that going on the offensive for Lindon is going to be a little bit risky. But yeah, the Mirkwood cavalry, the lighter Mirkwood units that were placed out in front here, have been fed into the meat grinder, most certainly. Uruk-hai infantry moving forward as well as Uruk-hai reavers. Good shots coming in, however, from the side from the Hiri Peng. This will be very, very costly for the Uruk-hai reavers indeed. In come the Orc fodder, and they will be here to just get in the way, and continued fire into the side here will be worthwhile. We'll be able to get a lot of damage onto the reavers, but again, like, there is a gap in the line now. Like, Mirkwood don't really have a front line as such at this stage. And I wonder how much infantry they've got hidden in these areas over here, because like, they had some axemen forward with their archers. Mithlond Lancers are in here throwing their javelins in. That's going to be fairly devastating for the Hiri Peng. As good as the Hiri Peng are, javelins will always beat out archers in terms of damage at close range, especially when it's Elven quality going both ways. Temple Inquisitors are going to go right round the back here. In fact, Lindon have gone right round the back with the unit of Harlenden Riders. Not the Horse Swords of Ulmo though, so I mean the Temple Inquisitors will be able to zone them out, albeit they will be taking consistent damage as well. I like this though. Isengard are taking point with their numbers and with their armour, and then Lindon will follow them in with that melee defense and that elven quality. Mirkwood being pulled out of shape once again by the Lindon Riders. Definitely going the way so far of the Isengard-Lindon alliance, I think. We shall see if they can pull it back. I mean, Mirkwood have got a very nice hill that they can utilise here. Woodland Realm Patrol have come back from routing. More spears as well. So they do have a lot of infantry, which has now revealed itself. Hiri Lang, Hiri Auth. Nice quality units, certainly. But like I said, they're going to be going toe-to-toe with Lindon in melee, which that melee defense, the javelins as well, if they engage in the manner that they have done so far, Lindon, I think they should be fine. There you can see Warns of Amon Lank utilising poison arrows, is that? That's a new addition, is it not? Anyway, Harlenden, or Noldering Guard rather, taking damage. I think it is, because it's a black trail, not a black arrow, which would signify AP. They do need to get more reinforcements on the front line here though, Lindon. Meanwhile, continued sort of skirmishing at arm's length, you would have to say. Doranernal archers continuing to take damage. It's been a bit of a disaster, to be honest with you, when it comes to Dol Amroth's attempts to skirmish. And to be honest with you, as much as they may want to sit back here, Dol Amroth and Numenor, I don't think they will get what they want out of this engagement. Now admittedly the Narun-Aru are extremely good in a skirmish fight. You can see here out on the flanks as well, the Parathil Riders. Based on the experience of the teams here, I would expect Numenor and Dol Amroth to pull this back, to be honest. And there goes Dale's General. He was being used aggressively after all, but it's still a successful first phase of this battle, I have to say, from these forces. Coalfell Maidens utilising their javelins, probably not worth going after the civilians, to be fair, but Dale have got so much in the way of archers, and they may feel as though, with the gains they've already made, if they can just bring the enemy team's numbers down to a critical level, they'll be able to overwhelm them. I still probably wouldn't go after the civilians though, especially considering the amount of pole arms that they have at their disposal, high quality ones as well with Numenors. Fire arrows, not really worth going as well. This is again something which most experienced players wouldn't go for, because you're not going to really do much. I mean, the Narun-Aru are locked morale, so you're not going to be able to rout them, and you're going to be firing slower, you're going to be using up more of your ammo. Here the archers do fly a little bit too close to the sun, but again, like, these units could very well find themselves just getting thrown under the bus. If Rhudaur come forward now, I mean, they're going to turn their backs on this as well, which would be a golden opportunity. Like, multiple HP they may be, but without the shield value from the front, you're going to do more damage to the dismounted Silver Swan Knights. But so far, a bit of a skirmish fight, and so far, I have to say, impressed with the newer players. It could all go horribly, horribly wrong very quickly for them, as it often does, but I mean, the Rhudaur Axemen here, they were thinking about charging in, but with the Troll Hunters nearby, they do end up thinking better of that. Those look like Ranger arrows as well. Clear white projectiles, yeah, Crownodine Rangers are firing in. So yeah, good plays so far. We shall see if that keeps up. Meanwhile, over here, the fight has turned around. The pikes have been increasingly more of a threat on this front line, of course, which neither Mordor nor Mirkwood have access to pikes. Mordor only have halberds, and Mirkwood have neither. You can see here the champions of the White Hand burrowing into the enemy lines, but between the Uruk captains and the Morannon Guard, that's going to be pretty nasty, but the Morannon Guard break in the face of that. Mordor's quality at the high end may be better than Isengard's as a general rule, and you can see they are actually winning this fight as a result of that. Guards of Orthanc having to go up against Minas Morgul chosen en masse. More Isengard units coming in. All they need to do really is keep Mordor at arm's length, because they're winning on the hill. They've really been picking Mirkwood apart, and obviously Mirkwood represent the bigger threat as it pertains to outright quality. The cavalry has been over here. That is bold. A frontal charge into the Melkor's chosen from the Horse Lords of Ulmo. Defeat is almost a certainty. They need to cycle out of there pretty quickly though, the Horse Lords. There's Uruk-hai Reavers nearby, as well as Minas Morgul chosen after all. Yeah, they need to keep these cavalry units moving, the Melkor's chosen, Mevin with his Melkor's chosen. There's still Temple Inquisitors in the backfield, Wardens of Amon Lank are still running around. Is there any Lindon cavalry, I wonder? No, there is Temple Guard with their AP arrows. So, I mean, to be fair, Mordor still have quite a lot to give, actually. But the problem is, like, they're not going to be able to face down Lindon and Isengard together, as 4 Lindon Marines start charging through. Blackguard of Barad-dûr routing because of how depleted they are. Yeah, and at no point in this fight have I felt like Mordor and Mirkwood managed to seize the initiative back, and I think a lot of that has to do with the deployment at the start, to be honest with you, where Mirkwood put themselves in harm's way and lost far too much right off the bat. And I think they only committed their cavalry to that fight as aggressively as they did because they felt under pressure to do something after the damage those crossbows were doing. So that is worth saying, because Mirkwood's cavalry I think is best used in a pseudo-defensive style, where when the enemy move forward, then you commit them. Because if you commit them to just sort of a meat grinder, again, the unshielded and more lightly armoured nature of Mirkwood's mounted units can come to bear. They're not unlike Lindon in that respect. It's just that unlike Lindon, they do have more solidity to them, generally speaking. Meanwhile, Berserkers are in here, very depleted at this point though. And the Wardens of Amon Lank, those axes, probably not... I don't know what Rob Goblin's doing here. He needs to get these units either committed or out of there. To be fair, I don't think it really matters at this point. They're going to get hunted down anyway. trying to get their Greenwood Rangers out of there, who may very well have racked up a good kill count. It's very difficult to sort of tell with archers in that respect, but Mirkwood's front line has crumbled in the face of the advance, and now Lindon and Isengard are going to be able to push in from the side of the central Mordor position, which is still going, well, reasonably strong. Upgraded Temple Executioners are in there. I say it's going reasonably strong. To be fair, the Guards of Orthanc have held very firm from the front, which is their primary asset, of course. Quite no, yeah, here are the Temple Guard, so they're going to get into melee, but Temple Guard not going to be as strong as Nazkai in melee. And with the backlines compromised, that is going to result in a victory for Isengard and Lindon. Not without losses, to be fair. When you're advancing into a Mirkwood position, especially backed up by some of Mordor's numbers, you're going to take losses, but it's still a victory that, if you'd offered this to them at the start with the amount they have left, they certainly would have taken it, I think. And to be fair, Mirkwood is still one last spit in the eye from Rob Goblin, as he's going to be able to continue shooting with his archers, and if he goes after the right units, and he goes after, in particular, the Lindon units, this could still prove to be a real problem in the late game. A very healthy unit of Minas Morgul chosen, routing in the face of that rear charge from the Horse Lords of Ulmo, who now, of course, will turn around and will turn these Hiri Peng into mush, as they were celebrating, amusingly enough. Celebrations will be short-lived for them. Meanwhile, we actually now see Numenorian steel bows. Defeat is a distinct possibility, as actually a full advance here from Dale and from Rhudaur. They're fighting uphill, which is not ideal, into a phalanx, so a lot of their basic units, this is probably where Dol Amroth and Numenor can start to make up the ground. Let's see, yeah, they're losing across pretty much every front, unfortunately. I mean, the Franadine Pikes and the Ferogiums are in here. Some Axe Throwers also doing their thing. Franadine Berserkers, that's actually some good damage. I have to say, for players I haven't seen play all that much, they haven't done half badly at all. Coldfell Maiden's getting into the Seafarers, but they will ultimately be shut down. It's not often I say this, but I think actually a bit more caution from Dale and Rhudaur would have been the answer, because ranged units, in terms of Dale's archers and Rhudaur's javelins, would have been the way they win this. I think they were too eager to get into melee in many ways, and with all of the polearms and other supporting tools that Numenor and Dol Amroth had, I think this is where they start to make up the ground in this fight in a very real sense. That's a little bit unfortunate. The Arathiran getting caught up in and amongst some barding herd. That's not what you want to see. Here you can see the knights are going to try and rip right down the lines as the Rhudaur archers are trying to pick up the slack. I don't know where these rangers are firing. Yeah, these rangers are on fire at will, which is not what you want to see from your rangers. These Witch-Realm enslavers need to be on the front line. I mean, they've gone all in, so everything needs to be in. It doesn't make a difference whether you want to save something or not at this point. The Franadine rangers need to be shooting into the centre of one of these blobs, because that will do a lot of damage to the pikes in particular, armour upgrades or no. They're just going to try and wedge their way through this formation here, the Arathiran. Yeah, again, like, this is not worth doing. It's not worth going after these really heavily depleted cavalry forces with your rangers. Rangers need to be going after infantry blobs, and it's these misjudgments from slightly newer players that will ultimately, I think, cost them this battle, because it started off so promisingly, actually. But in the end, I don't think it's going to be enough. The Franadine Berserkers are coming in, and this is where having such a polearm heavy army does really pay dividends, because a frontal assault is so difficult to make work in these terms. It's going to be much the same sort of situation here, albeit there was early signs of promise here, and you can see, yeah, they're routing now. And this is the issue when you go up against a powerhouse like Numenor and you're unprepared for the level of quality that they bring to the table. Franadine Noble's going to be able to sandwich these Knights of the Silver Swan, as are those Axemen as well. This probably will be the end of them, to be honest with you. I'd be very surprised if they didn't rout in this situation. Armour piercing on all sides. Are they going to be able to force their way out of there? No, I thought not. More javelins in behind the line, so yeah, it's a very nice defensive position, and I think ultimately that is going to be that for them. Meanwhile, I think it's just clean-up duty over here, is it not? Temple Guard is still over here, hacking and slashing their way through some Harlenden Guard. That won't last too much longer though. The Horse Lords of Ulmo should be able to charge into the back of that and and finish them off. They're shaken after all. Yeah, that's a bit of a... Well, no, the Lancers will come down. Yeah, and they do end up routing as a result of that, so that's Mordor dealt with. Elders of the Elven King still using their silver thorns, as are the Wardens of Amon Lank. I think they're actually taking cover behind the hill at this point. Have to say, like, they're dawdling a little bit here. They're allowing Mirkwood's archers to get a little bit too much value for money, for my liking. Rob Goblin really did suffer in the early stages of this game, but I mean, he's still, you know, he's going to make it difficult for those that conquered him to go on to win the battle ultimately, and you know, you need something significant in melee to commit to try and overrun something like the Elders of the Elven King. Still Wardens of Amon Lank in there as well, as they reveal themselves. What are they doing? A single Noldorin foot soldier and a Harlingen one as well. Going to be hacked to bits by those Mirkwood axes. A charge from the Horse Lords of Ulmo, doing some good damage there. They need to get out of there now though, because those two-handed blades will start to have their own impacts. Hiri Peng firing away on this general advance as well. As the four Lindon pikemen continue to pour forwards, as do the Dunlanders. Yeah, I mean, they're obviously going to lose Mirkwood, but it's how much they can take with them which will be significant, because of course Lindon and Isengard will want to preserve as much as they can for the fight later on, which, I have to say, despite a pretty ropey start, I think the Dol Amroth Numenor alliance is dealing with the infantry fairly well here, and like I said, they should have stayed at range, I think, a little bit more. The melee fight was always something that Numenor in particular were going to want, with all of their cohorts and shield guard and the Narun Aru. There are a few pockets on the flank, but... Well, there goes a general. I don't know what he was doing going into pikes on his own, to be honest, but there you go. Bowman coming down. There are a few areas, to be fair, where they are doing some good damage here. The Dalians on the flank. And there goes our Pharazôn as well, finished off by an Axeman in largely the same area as well, so no generals left for them. Whereas the Lindon and Isengard generals are still intact. The Arathurians still live, albeit in very low numbers indeed. Ranadine Berserkers. Again, it's the Phalanx which has really done them in here, which is part of the reason why they really should have been attempting to skirmish more than they did. Mordor's general slain on the field. Just waiting for the message that Mirkwood's general has also perished. Here are the Pharazôn, who, you know, to be fair, I mean, the Witcher and Slavers I think were committed too late as well. Their AP on the front line wouldn't have turned this whole fight around, but it would have been nice to have. And to be fair, they will at least do a little bit of damage to the Pharazôn Swordmasters here, take away some of their punch for the late game, which could very well prove to be fairly key. What have we got going on elsewhere, is the question. Still Ranadine Nobles as well, so I mean a few well-placed charges could still prove to be pretty decisive, in much the same way that Mirkwood's archers in the on the other side of the field have been. And black shots are coming down. I mean, maybe it hasn't been as efficient as I thought it was going to be. Interesting. Minas Morgul Chosen, who have returned. But yes, it's the team that are on the back foot can always make life as difficult as possible for the team that's ultimately going to defeat them, and I think that has been the case, largely. You can see over here the Elders of the Elven King continuing to fight their way through this situation. The Nazkai, there are pikes in here as well. Of course, they will fall at this point. Like, the tooltip is ultimately wrong. The Elders will be defeated here by Isengard's forces, and there goes Thranduil. But they didn't give their lives cheaply. They managed to kill off more of the opposing forces than it looked like they were initially going to. And you can't ask for more than that, really. As the pikes trudge in. What else have we got going on? Guards of Orthanc. There's still some crossbows over here as well, but they're extremely depleted. Is that Mirkwood gone? Indeed it is. Mirkwood are gone. Mordor still have, of course, those units that, I don't know, are they going to try and go into the town? there's already a unit inside the town. I don't know what it is, but it's one Nazgul, so he's still alive. I'm going to try and get those Minas Morgul chosen in to join him, perhaps. I don't think he's going to have that luxury, because Lindon are bearing down on them, and they should have more speed than the plate-clad orcs. I have to say, actually, Dale turning it around here in the final quarter of this fight, and it is actually increasingly looking like everything has ultimately fallen apart for Numenor and Dol Amroth. That is surprising, because it was looking like the front line was holding firm, but over here, the arrival of the Black Shots, if nothing else, seemed to do the business. Also, here in the backfield, Blackwolds keeping the Ardenaim shadow bows away. That could, again, big differences. I have to say, not bad at all from Dale and Rhudaur. I think the early stages of the game really set the precedent there. I think Dol Amroth was hoping to do some efficient trading, and Dale threw that right back in their face, and that has made the difference in the end. Granadine nobles have also been a big factor. Royal Legion of Armenelos and Pharazim Swordmasters now just being overwhelmed with sheer numbers. They are still a factor in the battle, Dol Amroth and Numenor, because they will be able to save those shadow bows and that one unit of Doran pikemen, but if they do come back to win it, it will be extremely surprising considering the numbers the other factions have. Granadines. There's still some Barding Herd that can join up with the boys, as well as some Dalian bowmen. And all those skirmishes for Dale, of course, is useful, because not only will they tend to win you skirmish fights, but they're also not defenceless in melee. They're good makeshift infantry. As long as you have some good quality around them, it can definitely have the results you want. Meanwhile, I think that Nazgul just got charged, did he not? He's trying to be charged, although the charge actually missed in the end, I think. Did it not? Yeah, one thing I will say though is that I think Lindon and Isengard were far more efficient in their victory, so I would say they're definitely the favourites going into the final phases of this battle. And this Nazgul, I mean, they're going to kill these Horse Lords of Ulmo. Every swing of the sword he makes, their stats are extremely high, so you want to get those Horse Lords out of there. Those Minas Morgul chosen did ultimately get in here, so we are actually for once on this map going to see the village at the centre play a role. What sort of role and how significant it will be is anyone's guess. What is that? That's the Horse Lords of Ulmo. So what are they going to do? Are they going to try and go after... I would recommend not going after the Granadine nobles, the numbers being what they are. Equal numbers, the Horse Lords of Ulmo, of course, will win that fight with relative ease, but with more than double, that's not going to be the case. Meanwhile, what's going on back over here? So yeah, Dol Amroth and Numenor are still sort of sequestered away in the back, but they're going to need to hope that these two sides really do heavy damage to one another, and I think, as unsavoury as it may be for them after their defeat at their hands, I think Dol Amroth and Numenor need to actually assist Dale and Rhudaur here. I think that those rangers in particular could prove to be extremely important. I mean, let's not forget that Mordor and Mirkwood are still technically a factor on the field as well, in the same kind of way, with the Minas Morgul chosen and the one Nazgul they have in the town. But this army is more substantial. Not only is it more substantial than Dale and Rhudaur, it's also of higher quality. There's stuff like Nazkai. There's the Noldorin Guard in here. There's also pikes, guards of Orthanc. Elite units as well as numbers, which means they're going to need to do something here. Numenorian cohorts. I think all of the other teams probably need to team up at this point, pool their resources, and then, when they're dealt with, they can then look to one another to see if they can be victorious. A single unit of Doran pikes is probably not going to be the answer to their woes. Again, like, they're clearly not eager to attack Dale and Rhudaur, which is quite understandable. I do really think the onus is on Lindon and Isengard to make the first move, but as disparate as they are, my first move, if I were them, would be to cleanse this village of Mordor's presence, because, you know, there's still a unit of 76 heavy spears and 1 Nazgul left. Get rid of them, and then move on to the primary foe, as you perceive it, which would be Dale and Rhudaur, but most of the army that's left, I think, is actually Dale. You can see these Horse Lords of Ulmo have ultimately ended up being slain by something. What's that? Where are the bodies? Can't see any Elven cavalry deaths over here. Are they going to try and charge into the Franadine again? That would be extremely ill-advised, and the Franadine nobles could very well prove to be a very significant unit going into the later stages here. She'll have to wait and see. What have we got going on up here? Rhudaur. They have seen the Ardenium shadow bows once again, but this is a classic case of players not being able to put aside their differences. I think he saw them and he was like, they're going to shoot us in the back, aren't they? Well, let's go after them, let's charge after them. He pulls away from the pikes as well. He's actually going to charge back into the centre of the pikes as they actually try to move away, and that will probably be enough to rout them actually, because they're wavering. Will it be sufficient? They take a few losses. Up close and personal like this, yeah. And Dol Amroth are done. I think that will ultimately come back to haunt them though, because actually the Lindon Isengard players are doing what I would have done, which is gratifying to see. They're going after the remnants of Mordor first, making sure they can't come to the aid of Dale and Rhudaur with this unit of heavy spears. They are going to claim the village first and foremost, but I think ultimately in the doing of this, they're going to charge in. I think it's possible there that based on how those units were moving, that Numenor and Dol Amroth actually weren't trying to go after Rhudaur and Dale, but Rhudaur and Dale spit on their offer of cooperation, I suppose. Unless they were. Like, if Numenor and Dol Amroth, I should say, were actually moving forward to attack this army in the back, then Dale and Rhudaur did exactly the right thing. But if they weren't, then they did the wrong thing. So only Muffins and Sin can really attest to what their true intentions were there. And in the end, they are now no longer on the field. They are actually the first alliance to fall in its entirety, because Mordor are technically still here. The Minas Morgul Chosen do break. Where'd that Nazgul go? Is he still in there? I think he is, isn't he? Yeah, there they go. So he falls now. So now Mordor go. Mordor and Mirkwood fall shortly afterwards, and that brings us to the final battle. And Lindon are already here, ready to meet the advance. And I like the fact that they're sort of seeing a more isolated pocket of resistance here, Dale, and they are going to try and charge it down as quickly as possible. Yes, they're going to take javelin fire pretty quickly, but they don't really have much of a choice at this point, because I would imagine, as part of their solid victory earlier, they probably used every ounce of ammunition in dispelling their previous foes. The Black Shots are still here. They're a significant infantry unit, but the numbers of elites they're facing down here at this point is going to be pretty tough, I think. Whatever happened to the Franadine? There are the Rangers, but what about the cavalry? Yeah, like, this is their main hope, I think. Has to be the nobles. That is really their only chance, but of course, with the occupation of the village being what it is, with the amount of pikes that Isengard and Lindon still have, it's still unlikely that the Franadine nobles are going to be enough to turn this fight around fully. But, you know, we'll see. I've seen stranger things happen. I mean, stuff like this, for example, like, there's nothing really they have that can match the Noldorin Guard, nor the Nazkai. So yeah, it's gonna be difficult, and I do think that the writing is on the wall somewhat. I think the onus is kind of on Isengard and Lindon, to be honest with you, to come out of their shell a little bit and attack forwards. It would make things a little bit more interesting, because at least then you're putting, with some godlike micro, Baldric the God could swing this battle around by pitching your tent inside the village. It's a little bit it could be a little bit disappointing, but hopefully they do come out, and hopefully they do win this the Chad way instead of the alternative. But there's no guarantees of that. I've been impressed actually with how on the front foot Dale have been willing to be in this fight. They haven't needed any invitation to take advantage of a gap, and Rhudaur have been a very nice supporting army to that, albeit you can see the difference in survivability between the two factions, because Rhudaur have really very little left. 2 horse swords of Ulmo going after the Rangers. The nobles are being taken away from the front line, which is a shame. They needed to stay over here. That 1 unit of Dalian bowmen was sent forward again. You need to advance in a unified fashion here. Still got some phalanx units, but not enough to make the difference. Those Bardian marksmen are going to get absolutely rolled by Noldorin Guard. Yeah, and you can see it's going to come down to quality here. It's just going to be a final stand really from Dale's infantry. They need the Franadine nobles over here so badly, but they were siphoned off by a unit which was ultimately not going to be able to do much at all. Barding herd breaking in the face of some scary Isengard forces. Pikes are moving in. It was always going to be the case, I think, but there was always the potential that those Franadine nobles could have made something happen, a chain route perhaps. Mithlond Marines also doing the same sort of thing, breaking off a substantial amount of the Earls of Dale there. A brave advance, but ultimately one that was always doomed. 4 Lindon pikemen are actually losing here to the Black Shots, as those lightly armoured elves from the west fall under the weight of those anime swords. Noldorin Guard are there, and one of the Franadine nobles does indeed fall. The most they can hope for at this point is just to fill their boots in terms of kills, and going after a softer unit like the Dunland Clansmen is not the worst way to achieve that. Franadine Rangers fighting on the front as well. So I think, yeah, it's going to come down to that. Dale have ultimately been destroyed. The Nazkai chasing them away. Black Shots are gone, so yeah, Dale are done, and that will just leave the remnants of Rhudaur for Lindon and Isengard to clean up. Franadine Rangers. I've always liked the look of the Franadine Rangers. Rhudaur in general have got an aesthetic I really quite like. It's not colourful, but it's like, there's just something about it I quite like. It's quite makeshift. It's, again, like their sort of plated armour, you can tell that like there's obvious discrepancies in it, like there's gaps in between the plates and such, but their level of craft obviously is not on the same level as something like this from the elves. There go the Franadine Rangers. And the rest of this battle is just going to be the Rhudaur cavalry charging in and out, trying to get some more kills before ultimately falling. In that vein, we will go up to ×2 speed. More kills. They're not going to be able to do much more of that, you would suggest. Lancers down. That banner carrier actually survived that. That's very impressive. From a unit of knights, certainly. They're going to charge into the clansmen again, which will allow them to get a few more kills. And it's just their general that survives. Go on. Banzai charge into the pikes, you know you want to. Yeah, he is going to. Oh, he actually pulls out at the last minute. That's disappointing. He could have had a glorious end. Instead, he's going to be hunted down like a dog at the hands of that Elven Rider and Bannerman. And there we go. Not a huge amount left for Isengard and Lindon, but enough to say that it was a well-deserved victory. A lot of that began, of course, with Mirkwood's deployment that Isengard and Lindon immediately started taking advantage of, as well as some of the questionable decisions that he made after that with his cavalry. But to be fair, Mirkwood later on, in spite of the fact the battle was already lost at that point, did do some damage to Lindon and Isengard as the battle wore on. Mordor, again, tried their best, but ultimately, I do believe that it would have been more beneficial to go for a numbers-focused army again, because they would have been able to cover more of the battlefield. They would have been able to, especially when you're alongside Mirkwood, like, you know Mirkwood are going to bring the quality. You know they are. So I personally would have gone for more numbers, but that's just me. Like, I keep saying that whenever I see Mordor play, like, everyone plays them as this faction where you've got to go for all the quality, we've got to do that. For cavalry, I agree that if you're going to bring cavalry, you may as well only bring the strongest units, because they're far more efficient than the entry level and mid-tier lance cavalry and the like. But when it comes to the infantry, it's a different story, and I think that Mordor would have got more mileage, and they would have been able to help Mirkwood more with more numbers. As it was, they could only marshal a small section of the field, which they were winning for a large period of time, but ultimately it was never going to end well for them in that regard. So unfortunate, but there you go. Impressed with Rhudaur and Dale though. Like, when you looked at the players, you would have expected Muffins and Sin to win that fairly comfortably, but in the end they didn't, and I think the precedent was set fairly early, to be honest with you, with that Dole Amroth moved forward with some of their cavalry and their archers, and Dale immediately threw that back in their face with obviously significant archer fire, black shots as well. The fact they lost their Haven Knights in that skirmish as well was obviously very damaging for Dole Amroth. Like, Numenor really lost nothing from that. It was really Dole Amroth moving forward and trying to utilise their cavalry in their skirmishes that went very poorly. It looked like they were going to be able to pull it back with all of their phalanxes and such, and if their rangers had been in a good position, I've no doubt they would have, to be honest with you. But in the end, it wasn't to be. In the end, despite the recovery that it looked like they were making, Rhudaur and Dale were then able to seize the initiative back once again and win, which is impressive. They didn't have enough left because they took a lot of damage doing that. They didn't have enough left to go on to win the whole game against Lindon and Isengard. But even so, I think they deserve a lot of credit for that. And fair play to them. Lindon not getting the most in terms of kills, but to be fair, they were facing off primarily against the smallest army on the field in Mirkwood. So that is more understandable, to be fair. And obviously Lindon would have been the main focus of any archers that would have been in their vicinity, as they often are. Horse Lords of Ulmo doing very well, Harlindon infantry also getting over 100 kills in the frontline fight, and the Noldorin Guard also doing quite nicely as well. But everything else getting a modest amount of kills, but it's worth saying that most of them would have been against higher end Mirkwood units, because the Woodland Realm Axemen and Patrol were dealt with by Isengard, and they obviously were the most numerous of the Mirkwood units. So that is worth bearing in mind as we consider the various kill counts. While he may have got the least, there is a reason for that. The most kills came to Eclipse, so it does go to show that the again, they were going up against Mordor, which were, aside from Eclipse himself, the most numerous army on the field today, and that, again, it goes to show Isengard going for the numbers a little bit more so, but even then, Isengard had a lot of Uruk-hai, a lot of their mid-tier stuff. Mordor could have gone for a significantly more numerous army, and I think it would have helped them. But that's just me. And even if they had done that, it still would have been so costly to the point that they probably wouldn't have gone on to win the battle as a whole. So it's one of those things where, Mirkwood's deployment in the end, I think, was what ended up setting the precedent for their loss, the Mirkwood-Mordor alliance. But regardless of that, big thank you to Angsfitz for sending this one to me, and a big thank you to all of the players for being a part of a very varied free-for-all, very back and forth. As these battles often are, they tend to be quite chaotic. This was in the classic style, really, where it was 2 2v2s, and then whoever was left alive fought for the middle at the end. So a free-for-all in the classic sense of the word, this one. So yeah, like I said, I thought that I had already gone through all of my backlog with that siege on Umbar, but this was actually the end of the backlog, as I noticed at the end. So now we have finally reached it. I think it's a solid month now that I've got videos stocked up for and made. But like I said, in several of the replays up until now, this does mean, of course, that I'm at the time of recording, which is at the end of September, I'm looking for more replays. I'm looking for more that I can do, because obviously it is the lifeblood of the channel. It is the core of what I do. Always going to be on the lookout for more good quality replays. So if anyone wants to send me some, do not hesitate to do so. I do have a siege on Bar Sagath, but the way that one was sent to me, the name of the replay, what the player said to me, I think it's quite clear that what he wants me to do is lay into the host of that battle for the stipulations that he put on how the battle had to be played. I can think of a better use of an hour and a half of my time, to be honest with you, than just laying into a player just for your benefit. That may sound kind of harsh and scathing, but I mean, that is ultimately what you want me to do. I know that is what you want me to do, so that isn't going to gain much appreciation from the people who are watching replays for good quality content, though, is it? So I'm not going to satisfy your need for that, unfortunately. Again, I think I have. It's been long enough, I think, to the point where I probably could use Barsagath again. It is one of those maps that does tend to get used over and over again. But I think enough time has passed to the point, especially at the point when this will come out, which is in a month's time, where I could probably use it again. But again, I don't want to use that replay unless I absolutely have to, because of the general feeling that I get from how and why it was sent. But regardless, on the lookout for more replays if you have any that you want to send to me. Even at the time this comes out in a month's time, I will still always be looking for replays. So do not hesitate. It's obviously going to be the same for Reforged, but also for Silmarillion as well. As for other stuff, like Rise of Mordor is something that I could also do. Albeit I would need to re-download Attila and the like. Again, I'm not the biggest fan of Attila, mechanically speaking, for a few reasons, but stylistically you can't argue with the work that the Rise of Mordor team have done. So we'll see on that one. We'll see. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.